Tigger hit the ground, and the ground hit back, and that was the arrangement. This was the clearing by the stream, the one where the earth had a give to it, a spring, a willingness to be landed on that most ground lacked. Most ground just sat there. This ground participated. Tigger's paws struck, and the ground compressed beneath them, wet, cold, dense with the winter's stored water. And then the ground pushed, and the pushing was the best part, because the pushing meant the ground wanted him back in the air as much as he wanted to be there, and between the two of them, Tigger's legs and the earth's elasticity, the air was where he spent most of his time, which was where a Tigger ought to be. He bounced across the clearing. The first bounce was diagnostic, the legs gathering, the paws pressing, the ground answering. Firm today, cold firm. The frost that had crept in overnight had stiffened the top layer, and the stiffening gave the launch an edge, a crispness, like biting into something that crunches before it yields. The second bounce was higher. The third was the one where the clearing opened up beneath him, and the stream flashed silver through the trees, and the wood spread out in every direction, green and brown and grey and wet, and Tigger was above it all for a fraction of a second, and the fraction was complete. Each landing was a conversation with the ground, a rapid, wordless exchange of information. Hard, soft, root, mud, stone beneath mud, moss on stone. The ground told him everything, and he heard everything, and he remembered everything, and the remembering was physical, stored in his paws and his legs and the muscles of his back. A robin sat on a low branch ahead of him. Tigger saw it. Brown, small, head tilted, the black eye watching him with the absolute attention that small birds bring to large, moving things. Then the bounce carried him past, and the robin was behind him, replaced by the next thing, which was a puddle, and the puddle was cold and bright, and shattered into light when his paw hit it, and the light was on his stripes for a moment, before the next bounce took it away. The stripes dried in the air between bounces. They were good stripes, thick, dark, running the length of his body in the pattern that was his pattern and no one else's. In winter the stripes held cold, and in summer they held heat, and in spring they held both, and right now, mid-bounce, the stripes on his left side were wet from the puddle, and the stripes on his right were dry from the morning's earlier bouncing, and the difference between the two sides was a fact his body knew and his mind did not consider. He bounced along the upper path, over the oak roots, under the beech branches, through the patches of pale sunlight that lay across the ground where the canopy thinned. Each patch was warm, each gap between patches was cold. Warm, cold, warm, cold. The alternation played across his stripes, and the sensation was warm, cold, warm, cold. And that was the morning, and the morning was extraordinarily, unimprovably good. Piglet walked the lower path. He walked it every morning, carefully, attentively, with his scarf wrapped tight and his eyes on the ground, and the ground telling him things. The lower path was his. Not owned. Piglet did not own things, or if he did not think of them that way, but known. Known the way you know a room you have sat in every day for a year, where the light falls and where the draught comes from, and which floorboard speaks when you step on it. The path ran along the east bank of the stream, below the bank where the trees leaned in overhead and the wind passed above. The stream ran beside him, louder than it had been in winter, the post-collapse sound, brighter and more open, running over stones that had been buried before the bank gave way and were exposed now, smooth and various, and the water found its way between them, and the finding was its song. Spring was here. Piglet could hear it in the stream, and feel it in the ground, and see it in the pale new leaves overhead. But he could also hear it in the other things, the small things, the ground-level things that his particular literacy read without effort. The insects were returning. He could hear them in the leaf litter. Not see them, not yet, but hear the small industry of their movement, the clicks and rustles of creatures resuming the work that winter had suspended. A beetle crossed the path ahead of him, green-black, purposeful, walking with the determined pace of a creature that knows exactly where it is going and does not intend to explain. Piglet watched it until it disappeared into the moss at the path's edge. A wren was singing somewhere upstream, a rapid, complicated sound that Piglet had learned to distinguish from the robin's song. He could imitate it, the wren's song, and sometimes, if he was patient and still, the wren sang back. This morning, he stood by the stream bank and listened, and the wren sang, and Piglet received the song with recognition and pleasure and the quiet comfort of the familiar. He walked into the stretch where the trees grew closest and the ground was softest, and the world, for 20 or 30 paces, felt small and sheltered and full. His stretch. The leaf litter here was deep and various, layers of autumn's leaves decomposing beneath the spring's new growth, and in the layers the ground-level world lived. Beetles, woodlice, the pale industrious larvae that would become things with wings when summer came. The stream sound was softer here, muffled by the vegetation, and in the softened quiet Piglet could hear the other sounds, the small clicks, the rustles, the sound of the earth doing what the earth does when it is left alone. And in the thickest part, where two hawthorns leaned together and made a kind of room, Piglet could see something that made him stop. A nest. Small, low, tucked into the fork where the branches met, perhaps 2 feet from the ground, made of dry grass and moss and a few pale feathers, woven together with the precise, practiced architecture of a bird that knew exactly what it was building and had built it before and would build it again. A wren's nest, round, domed, with a small entrance at the side, barely large enough for a beak. Piglet stood very still. He had not seen the birds build it. He had only noticed 3 mornings ago that the wrens were spending more time in this section of the path, flitting between the hawthorns, carrying strands of grass in their beaks, the rapid, purposeful flight of birds at work. Then, 2 mornings ago, he had heard the particular quality of call that wrens make when they are building, a sound distinct from the territorial song, quicker and more functional. And then this morning the nest was there, complete, as though it had always been there and he had only just learned to see it. He looked at it for a long time. The structure was beautiful in the way that all built things are beautiful when the builder has built with exactness, every strand placed, every feather positioned, the dome smooth and even and precisely fitted to the fork that held it. If this pair stayed, if the path stayed quiet, if the world held still enough, they might lay eggs by mid-spring. 5 or 6, tiny and white with rust-coloured speckling, and the female would sit on them for 2 weeks in the warm dark of the dome, and the male would sing from the hawthorn branches, and the eggs would be what eggs become. Piglet wrapped his scarf a little tighter and walked on. Behind him, the wren resumed its song. Tigger found Piglet on a Tuesday. This was not difficult. Piglet was small and Tigger was fast, and the 100 Acre Wood was not, when you bounced through it at speed, particularly large. Tigger had been bouncing along the upper path, the section where the oaks grew tall and the ground was firm and the roots made excellent launching points, when he heard the stream below and remembered that the stream was where the springy ground was, the good ground, and he veered downward through the trees, his body angling instinctively for the gap between the ash trunk and the birch, and came upon the lower path from above, landing with a thump that sent a spray of mud in a wide, enthusiastic arc.
"Piglet, old pal,"
said Tigger.
"Didn't know you came down here."
Piglet, who had been crouching to look at something in the moss, a beetle, green, black and purposeful, crossing the path with the determined pace Piglet admired, stood up. Mud speckled his scarf. A drop of it sat on his ear.
I walk here every morning.
said Piglet.
It's my path.
Your path.
Said Tigger.
It's a good path, Piglet. Look at this ground. Feel this ground.
He bounced once, experimentally. The ground along the lower path was softer than the upper path, wetter, more saturated with the stream's proximity, and the softness gave it a quality that Tigger's paws recognized instantly. Give. Spring. The willingness to return what was put into it.
It's springy,
Said Tigger.
Piglet. This ground is springy.
Yes,
Said Piglet.
it's quite soft here because of the stream.
It's wonderful.
Tigger bounced again, higher this time, and the landing sent the beetles scurrying sideways into the leaf litter with the offended urgency of a creature whose commute has been interrupted. In the hawthorn bushes 20 paces ahead, a bird startled, a small brown shape lifting from a low branch with a rapid, papery sound of wings, rising into the canopy and gone. Piglet watched the bird go. He watched the space where it had been. The branch still swayed from the departure, a slight, diminishing oscillation that held the bird's presence for a moment after the bird itself was gone.
What else is down here?
Said Tigger.
Where does it go?
He showed Tigger the curve of the path along the bank. He showed him where the bank was stable, the section Rabbit had reinforced with drainage channels, and where it was still healing, the new grass soft and thin over the raw earth of last spring's collapse. He showed him the alders, and the place where the stream ran over the newly exposed stones, and the difference in sound between the water over flat stones and the water over round ones. He showed him the stretch where the trees leaned in and the ground was softest and the world grew small and full. He showed him the deep leaf litter and the insects working in it and the light coming through the hawthorn branches in moving patterns on the ground. He showed him the nest.
Wrens.
Said Piglet. His voice was quiet and steady.
They built it last week. A pair. If the path stays quiet, they might have eggs by mid-spring.
Tigger looked at the nest. It was small and round and brown, tucked into the hawthorn fork, and Tigger looked at it with his full attention for exactly the amount of time his full attention lasted, which was the length of a single apprehension. He saw the nest, he saw the dome, he saw the entrance, he saw Piglet's face, the quiet excitement, the hope, the specific care with which Piglet regarded this small, woven thing in the branches.
That's great, Piglet,
said Tigger.
That's really great. And this ground, Piglet, this ground is the springiest ground I've ever bounced on. Can I come back tomorrow?
Piglet looked at the nest. He looked at Tigger. Tigger was smiling with his whole body, as though happiness were a physical event that started at the tail and travelled upward through the stripes until it reached the face, which was the last to know about it and the most enthusiastic to confirm it.
Of course,
said Piglet. Tigger came back. He came back the next morning, arriving from the upper path with a crash of branches, a shower of dewdrops, the irrepressible energy of a body that had been bouncing since dawn and had not yet found a reason to stop. He landed on the lower path, and the path received him and gave him back to the air. He bounced again, further this time, the world wet and green and cold against his stripes, and the ground was extraordinary. He bounced the length of the stretch, the soft stretch, the sheltered stretch, Piglet's stretch, and every landing was a discovery. Here the ground was firm with a root beneath it, and the root added a hardness to the spring that changed the angle of the rebound. Here it was pure mud, soft and deep, and the landing sank to the ankle, and the launching required more force from the legs, a deeper gathering, and the effort was part of the pleasure. Here, just here, in the middle, where the two hawthorns leaned together, the ground resonated, as though there were a hollow beneath the surface that amplified the impact, and the bounce off this ground was the highest and the best, and the air was cold, and the branches were close, and Tigger was, for a fraction of a second at the top of each arc, completely still, weightless, suspended between the ground he had left and the ground he was going to. In the hawthorn bushes, the wrens were not singing. He came back the morning after that, and the morning after that. Each morning he learned the path a little more, with his body which learned everything. His paws mapped the root structure beneath the soil. His legs calibrated the force required for each section. His shoulders knew which branches to duck and which to clip, and the clipping scattered drops, and the drops were cold, and the cold was good. On the fourth morning, he met Piglet on the path. Piglet was walking his careful, attentive walk, his eyes on the ground, his scarf tight.
"Piglet,"
said Tigger.
"This ground. You know what I found yesterday? If you bounce off the bit by the big root, the one that sticks up, and aim for the mossy section, you can get this kind of spinning thing going. And the spin, Piglet, the spin is incredible."
That sounds exciting,
said Piglet.
"It is. It really is. And the bit by the hawthorns, the springy bit, I think it's even springier than before. Like the ground is learning my bounce, you know, getting better at it."
Piglet said nothing. He adjusted his scarf. In the bushes nearby, something small was moving away into the deeper vegetation, into the places where the path's disturbance had not yet reached.
"This is the best path, Piglet,"
said Tigger.
"You were right to show me. This is the best thing ever."
I'm glad you like it,
said Piglet. The branch where the bird had been was still again. The bird had not come back. The days grew longer, the mornings warmer, and Tigger bounced through the lower path, and the lower path was the best thing that had ever happened to him. He bounced every morning now. He came from the upper path, always from above, always arriving with a crash, a shower of displaced water, the particular enthusiasm of a body that has located its favorite place in the world and is returning to it. And he bounced the full length of the stretch, from the alders to the place where the path curved away toward the meadow. The ground held the morning's moisture and gave under his weight and returned it, and each day he found the subtle variations, firmer here where a root had shifted overnight, softer here where the rain had pooled, and the variations were the pleasure, and the providing was inexhaustible. He was grateful. He was grateful to Piglet for showing him this place, for sharing this path that Piglet loved, and the gratitude was genuine and total and expressed with the same full-body enthusiasm that Tigger expressed everything. He told Piglet so on the mornings when they crossed paths, Piglet walking carefully along the path, Tigger bouncing through it.
"Piglet, old pal, this path is the greatest."
And Piglet would nod and adjust his scarf and continue walking, and if his face had an expression that was different from the face he had worn when he first showed Tigger the path, Tigger did not notice, because the next bounce was arriving, and the ground was calling, and the morning was happening all at once, and the face of a small animal walking the other direction was a piece of data that entered and passed through without leaving a mark. On a morning midway through the second week, Tigger bounced the stretch at dawn. The ground was cold, and the cold made it firm, and the firmness was a gift. His paws struck the path answered, each answer different. The section by the alders yielding and deep, the section past the exposed roots sharp and quick, the ground snapping him back almost before the landing was complete. A puddle near the stream's edge shattered under his left paw. Mud from where the moss had been, bare now, the surface smooth and dark and hard, gave a clean, flat launch that sent him higher than the root section, higher than the alders, into the cold air where his stripes tightened and the branches were close. He came down through the hawthorns. A branch caught his shoulder on the way up, a low branch, splintered at the tip where it had been caught before, the pale wood exposed, and the catching cost him nothing, a scrape across the stripes that registered and was forgotten. His paw landed on the flat ground beneath the nest, packed earth, dense, the surface like a drum, and the resonance was there, the hollow quality, the gift, and the bounce off this ground was the best bounce, the one his body came back for every morning. At the top of the arc, a leaf fell, dislodged by his passage, and drifted down behind him toward the nest entrance. He landed on the far side of the hawthorns. A celandine stem, already flat, already pressed into the mud by a print that matched his own, compressed further beneath his paw and did not spring back. The next landing found the mossy section, what was left of it, the moss thinned and patchy now, ground to fragments at the center, and the moss gave the launch a softness that the bare sections lacked, a quality of forgiveness in the takeoff, and the forgiveness was good. The stretch ended at the curve. Tigger turned and bounced back. The morning was cold and bright, and the ground was his, and the ground was extraordinary. The birds had moved. Piglet noticed this on a Thursday, a quiet Thursday, a morning when the dew was heavy and the path smelled of wet earth and green growth, and the stream ran beside him with its new bright song. He walked the stretch. He passed the hawthorns. He looked toward the nest. The wrens were not there. They had been there 2 days ago. He was certain of that. He had heard them calling, the quick territorial song from the hawthorn branches, and he had felt the particular quality of presence that nesting birds give to a place, a density, a layering of attention over the landscape, the sense of something being tended. That quality was gone. The nest was there, the birds were not. He stood in front of the nest for a long time. The nest was intact, the dome undamaged, the entrance open, the structure as solid as it had been when the birds built it. Nothing had disturbed it from outside, no predator, no storm. The architecture was sound. The birds had simply left. Piglet looked at the ground around the hawthorns. The earth was churned, the soft, wet earth that he knew so well, that he read every morning like a text in the language he was literate in, and the churning was fresh and deep, the marks of something heavy hitting the ground again and again, the imprints overlapping in a dense, repetitive pattern that covered the ground beneath the nest from the path's edge to the base of the bushes. The moss that had grown there, smooth and green and insulating, was torn and scattered, ground into the mud by the force of repeated impact. Piglet looked at the marks. He looked at the empty nest. He did not draw a line between them, not because the line was not visible. The line was, to Piglet, exactly as visible as the exposed root of the old willow had been a year ago, the kind of thing that only someone at ground level could see. But seeing a line and saying a line are different things, and the saying required something Piglet was not yet ready to do. He wrapped his scarf tighter and walked on. The rest of the wood was blooming. This was what spring did. It filled things. It filled the meadow with buttercups, and the far trees with birdsong, and the air with pollen and the smell of growth. Rabbit's garden was producing, the early lettuces and radishes, the first peas climbing their stakes with the orderly enthusiasm that Rabbit's gardens always produced, plants that grew as though they had been briefed. Kanga brought rue to the meadow. Pooh ate honey from the second shelf, where the spring light made the pot glow in the mornings. On the lower path, the celandines stayed flat. The insects were fewer. Piglet noticed this as an accumulation of small absences that added up to a shape. The beetles were less frequent. The woodlice had retreated to the margins, concentrated in the edges where the vegetation was thickest and the disturbance was lightest. The path itself, the center of the path where the landings fell, was bare of them. The sound had changed. This was the thing Piglet noticed most, because sound was his primary sense, the one his smallness had sharpened into a gift. The clicks and rustles that had filled the leaf litter all spring were fewer, farther apart, less continuous. The ground bass of the path's music, the fundamental, was thinning. The mornings were quieter, not silent, quieter, and the quieter was growing. He walked the path later now. Not much later, half an hour perhaps, enough time for Tigger's morning bouncing to finish. He had not articulated this to himself as a strategy. His body, which had spent a year learning to attend to the world at ground level, had also learned to attend to the pattern of disturbance, and the avoidance arrived as a redirection, the path itself telling him when it was ready. He walked the stretch. The hawthorn branches at the lower levels were broken, snapped where a body had risen through them repeatedly, the broken ends pale and raw against the new green growth. The ground beneath the hawthorns was hard, not the softness he remembered, the yielding, moisture-rich earth that had supported the moss and the insects and the nest. Hard, compacted by the daily, rhythmic impact of a body that had made this ground its favourite place, the soil pressed into a surface that repelled water rather than absorbing it, that grew nothing, that had the dead, flat quality of ground that has been beaten into submission. The nest was still there, still intact, still empty. The leaf in its entrance had been joined by a second, and neither had been removed. Piglet looked at the nest. He looked at the hard ground beneath it. He looked at the broken branches above it, and he understood, completely and specifically, what had happened and why. And the understanding sat in him the way the knowledge of the hollow ground had sat in him a year ago, heavy, specific, and without anyone to hand it to. Tigger showed Piglet the springiest ground. He had been meaning to for days, since the first morning he had found the spot, the particular spot, the place in the middle of the stretch where the ground had that resonance, that hollow quality, that extra gift of height. The spot was Tigger's favourite place in the entire wood, and Tigger's favourites were absolute while they lasted, and this one had lasted longer than most. 3 weeks, a kind of permanence.
Piglet, you have to try this. Come here, right here. Feel this ground.
It was mid-morning on a day when the spring had advanced far enough that the trees were fully leafed and the stream was settling toward its summer level, and the meadow beyond the path was bright with flowers. Piglet had been walking. He walked the path later now, waiting until the morning's bouncing was done, though if you had asked him why he walked later, he would have said something about the light being better. And the light was better, and the statement would have been true in the way that a true statement can also be an evasion. He came to where Tigger stood, or rather where Tigger vibrated, because Tigger standing still was a rapid oscillation between standing and the first microsecond of a bounce, his body unable to commit fully to either state.
Right here,
said Tigger.
This is the spot. The springiest ground in the whole wood. Feel it, Piglet. Just bounce a little.
Piglet looked at the ground. It was the ground beneath the hawthorns, the place where the wrens had built, the place where Piglet had stood a month ago and imagined eggs, imagined chicks, imagined the small, accumulating miracle of birds choosing to stay. The ground was churned and bare. The moss was gone. The insects were absent, driven to the margins. The hawthorn branches above were broken at the lower levels, snapped cleanly where a body had risen through them, the broken ends pale and raw, and the breaking had let in more light than this section of the path was used to, and the extra light had dried the ground further. Piglet saw all of this. He saw it from below, and from below the damage was detailed and specific and complete.
It's very nice, Tigger,
said Piglet.
Nice,
said Tigger.
Nice. It's magnificent. Watch this.
He bounced to demonstrate. The ground compressed and sprang back, and Tigger sailed upward, his stripes blurring, his tail a streak, and at the apex of the bounce, his paws brushed the broken hawthorn branches, and a shower of new leaves drifted down around him, green and torn, falling slowly in the still air. Piglet opened his mouth. His lips moved, not the old trembling, not retreat, but the shape of a sentence forming and finding itself wrong. His mouth closed. He watched the leaves settle on the bare ground where the nest had been. He watched one land in the nest's entrance, joining the others that no beak had cleared.
"It's very nice,"
said Piglet. He stood on the path where the celandines had been, yellow and small, and opening in the sun, trampled now, their stems bent, their petals in the mud, and he said nothing else. Tigger was bouncing through the upper part of the wood when he decided to visit the lower path. He had been elsewhere for a few days. The wood was large and full of ground, and bouncing was various. The clearing by the stream had a new patch of firm ground where a fallen branch had compressed the earth, and the firmness gave his landings a sharp, definitive quality that was different from the lower path's yielding softness. There was also a section of the upper path where the oaks had dropped last year's acorns into a depression that had filled with rain, and the surface of the puddle was taut with surface tension, and if you landed on it at exactly the right speed, the surface held for a fraction of a second before breaking, and the holding was a sensation Tigger had never felt before and was trying to reproduce. But the lower path pulled him back. The memory of that particular springiness, the give and return, the hollow resonance of the spot by the hawthorns. His pause remembered it precisely, physically, without context. The springiness existed in his body as a fact, and the fact had no story attached to it, no before and no after, just the sensation itself, bright and available and pulling him back. He came down through the trees. The morning was warm, late spring warm, the air heavy with pollen and the smell of growth, the kind of morning when every living thing in the wood was doing what living things do in late spring, which is to hurry. Tigger landed on the lower path. The mud was drier now than it had been in early spring, the path firmer, the stream lower, the season further along, and the landing had a different quality, a less forgiving quality, harder, more compact, less give. He bounced along the stretch. The hawthorns were there, the ground was there, the spot was there. And the spot was different too, harder, the soil compacted by weeks of daily landings into something that no longer had the spring it once had. He bounced harder, compensating, driving his legs down with more force, and the compensating worked. The ground still returned him to the air, but the return had a reluctance, like a conversation partner who was still answering but had lost interest in the exchange. He bounced the full length of the stretch and came around the curve where the path opened toward the meadow, and there was Piglet. Piglet was standing by the hawthorn bushes, not walking, not crouching to look at something in the moss, standing, still, the stillness of attention rather than the stillness of fear, the stillness of someone who has come to look at a thing they already know and is looking at it anyway, because looking is what they do. He was looking at the nest. Tigger landed. The landing was soft, softer than his usual landing, modulated by some instinct deeper than thought. He had seen Piglet, and the seeing had done something to the landing, and what it had done was make it quieter. He stood, or his version of standing, and looked at what Piglet was looking at. The nest, the wren's nest. Small, round, domed, tucked into the hawthorn fork. The dome was intact. The entrance was dark, empty. 3 leaves lodged in the entrance. The moss at its edges was brown, dried, the green gone from it. The feathers that had been woven into the structure, pale, small, placed with precision, had loosened as the grass and moss that held them dried and shrank. The nest was still a nest. It was not a home. Piglet was looking at it. His scarf was tight at his neck, and his hands were at his sides, and his face was a face Tigger had never seen on Piglet before. Piglet's face was not sad exactly. It was still. It was the face of someone standing in front of something they had expected and carried and arrived at, and the arriving was a settling rather than a shock, and the fact was worse than a surprise would have been, because a surprise can be denied and a fact cannot. Tigger looked at Piglet's face. He remembered a different face. Not this one, not this still, unsurprised face beside the empty nest. The face Piglet had worn weeks ago, standing in this same spot, showing Tigger the nest for the first time. The quiet excitement, the hope, the eyes that had learned to be steady, looking at the small, woven thing in the branches with the specific attention that Piglet brought to things he cared about. And Piglet's voice.
If the path stays quiet, they might have eggs by mid-spring.
The two faces, the one Tigger was seeing and the one Tigger was remembering, existed in the same space. And they were different. And the difference was a distance. And the distance meant something. Tigger did not know what it meant. His body knew it the way his body knew ground, physically, immediately, without the mediation of understanding. The distance between the two faces was a fact that his paws could feel, a change in the texture of the world, and the change was not a landing and not a launch, but a stopping, a suspension, and the suspension had no spring in it, no return. Then the flood. Birds, startling, the papery sound of wings, the branch swaying empty, the beetle scurrying sideways from the spray of mud, Piglet crouching where it had been, the ground receiving him, receiving him, receiving him, harder each day. Leaves falling from broken branches, pale at the break, raw, his paw brushing them at the top of each arc, the leaves drifting down onto the nest. The churned earth, his marks, his pattern, dense, repeated, covering the ground where the moss had been, where the insects had been. The celandines, yellow, small, opening, then flat, stems bent, petals in mud. Piglet walking later, Piglet waiting. Piglet's face when Tigger said, "Magnificent," standing on the trampled ground, looking at the bare earth and the broken branches, knowing. Piglet had known. Piglet had known and had not spoken, and the not speaking. Tigger stood on the lower path. He was not bouncing. His paws were on the ground, all four of them, the 4 points of contact that were usually the briefest phase of his movement, the fraction of a second between landing and launching, and now the fraction was extending, and the extending was the ground holding him in a way it had never held him before, not with spring, but with weight, not with return, but with staying. And the staying was the heaviest thing Tigger had ever felt. He looked at Piglet. Piglet looked at the nest. Neither of them spoke. The stream ran beside them, bright and busy. A bee crossed the path above them, heading for the meadow where the flowers still grew. The hawthorn leaves moved in a breeze too gentle to feel. Tigger's tail was still. The present tense had acquired a past. Piglet had felt Tigger arrive, the thump of the landing, different from the usual thump, softer. He had not turned. But Tigger was not bouncing. He turned and looked at Tigger. Tigger was standing still, genuinely still, his paws on the hard ground, his stripes motionless, his tail hanging. And his face, seen from the angle that showed the underside of things, looked like weight arriving in a body that had never carried it. Piglet saw that Tigger knew. He did not say anything. There was nothing to say that would be smaller than what had already happened in the silence between them. The stream ran. The path held them. The nest was empty above them both. Tigger did not come to the lower path the next morning. The path began slowly to recover. Not quickly, not completely. The beetles crossed the path in the early mornings. The woodlice worked the leaf litter. The ants rebuilt their trails. The celandines pushed up new stems at the margins, not in the trampled center, where the soil was compacted beyond anything a small flower could manage in a single season, but at the edges, where the roots could find purchase. Yellow faces opening in the sun. The flowers did not know they were recovering. They were being flowers. The being flowers was the recovery. The wrens did not come back. Their window had closed. Mid-spring had passed, and the birds that were going to nest had nested elsewhere, and the empty nest in the hawthorn fork stayed empty, drying slowly in the warming air. Both were true, the return and the absence, the insects and the empty nest. Piglet walked through both every morning, and both were part of the path now. Tigger bounced through other parts of the wood. He bounced through the clearing by the stream, where the ground was firm and dry and had no history that his paws needed to reckon with. He bounced through the meadow where the buttercups grew thick and the grass was long and the space was open, and the openness was a form of safety that Tigger had never needed before and needed now. He bounced along the upper path, over the oak roots, under the beech branches, through the patches of sunlight that lay across the ground like warm stones. He bounced. He was Tigger. The bouncing was what Tigger was, and the bouncing had not stopped, and the bouncing would not stop, because the bouncing was not a performance or a choice, but the fundamental expression of a body that was built for it, and you cannot ask a stream to stop running without asking it to stop being a stream. But there was something different now. Before a bounce, in the fraction of a second between the gathering of force in his legs and the launching, Tigger looked around. Not down, not at the ground he was about to leave, around. A brief sweep of attention, fast, Tigger fast, a single apprehension that lasted no longer than the apprehensions had always lasted, but was aimed differently. Not at the sensation of the launch, at the space the launch would fill. The branch above him, and what might be sitting on it. The ground ahead of him, and what might be crossing it. The air beside him, and what might be flying through it. The look around lasted a fraction of a second, a blink, a beat, an interval so brief that no one watching Tigger bounce would have seen it, would have seen anything but the same Tigger, the same bounce, the same full-force joy. But the interval was there. The interval was new. And the interval was the difference between a body that launched because launching was what it did, and a body that looked first and then launched, and the looking first was a choice, and the choice was the wait, and the wait was permanent. Pooh found Tigger by the stream on an afternoon when the light was golden and warm, and the world was being the sort of agreeable that makes bears walk slowly and think about honey. Pooh had been walking, slowly, without destination, in the way that Pooh walked when the honey at home was finished, and the walk was the thing between the finishing and the finding, and he came around the bend where the stream widened into the shallows, and there was Tigger. Tigger was sitting on the bank. Sitting. Not bouncing, not vibrating, not oscillating between sitting and the first microsecond of a bounce, sitting with his legs folded beneath him and his tail still and his eyes on the water. And the sitting had a quality that Pooh recognized from other animals at other times when something was heavier than their usual carrying.
"Hello, Tigger,"
said Pooh.
Hey, Pooh buddy,
said Tigger. His voice had its usual energy. The voice could not help having energy. But beneath the energy there was something Pooh could hear. Pooh sat down beside him. This was what Pooh did. When something was wrong with someone Pooh loved, and Pooh loved everyone, but the loving was not the same as the helping, and what was always possible was the sitting, Pooh sat. He did not ask what was wrong, because sometimes the answer was not ready, and the not readiness needed company more than it needed questions. They sat for a while. The stream ran past them, clear and shallow, the water moving over the stones with the sound of water being water. A dragonfly crossed above the surface, iridescent and purposeful, its wings catching the light.
Pooh,
said Tigger.
"Yes?"
have you ever done something? Something you really loved doing? Something that was the most you thing you could do, and then found out that the doing was...
Tigger paused. His tail twitched, the old reflex, the body's habit of motion processing what the mind could not yet articulate.
That the doing was hurting something? Not on purpose, not because you were careless, just because the doing was big. Bigger than the place it was in.
Pooh thought about this. He thought about it slowly, and from the inside, and with the kind of patience that comes from a mind that does not rush, because it has never learned to value speed over arrival. He thought about honey. He thought about the bird bath pot on the step, frozen all winter, and the wren that had not come back. He thought about the door he had closed in December, and the warmth that had stayed in, and the world that had stayed out.
I think,
Said Pooh, carefully.
that sometimes you can eat honey so happily that you don't notice the table shaking.
Tigger looked at him. Tigger's attention, which was always total and always brief, was total now and was not brief.
The table doesn't mind,
Said Pooh.
but the things on the table might.
They sat with this. The stream ran. The dragonfly came back, or a different dragonfly came, and neither Pooh nor Tigger knew which, and neither of them minded. Pooh left eventually, following some internal compass that pointed toward honey or home or both. Tigger stayed. He sat on the bank and watched the water run over the smooth stones, and the stones were smooth from years of water, and the water had not known it was smoothing them, and the stones had not known they were being smoothed, and the not knowing on both sides had not prevented the change, and the change was permanent, and the permanence sat in Tigger, the way the stream sat in its banks, heavily, with nowhere else to go. He met Eeyore by the new willows days later. Eeyore was looking at them with the expression of someone who has seen a great many things grow and a great many things stop growing, and finds both equally unsurprising.
"You're walking,
Said Eeyore. He chewed a thistle.
not a complaint. Observation."
They stood by the stream. Tigger said nothing. Eeyore said nothing. The stream ran past, and the willows swayed, and the silence had the particular quality of a silence between two animals who are not uncomfortable with it.
"Piglet's path is quieter than it used to be."
Said Eeyore. Tigger's tail stopped.
"That's the thing about not knowing.
Said Eeyore.
You don't know it until you do. And then you do, and you can't go back to not."
He did not say anything else about it. He stood by the stream and chewed his thistle with the slow, thorough attention that Eeyore brought to everything, and the attention was the same attention he would have brought to it yesterday, or last week, or last year. Tigger asked Piglet on a morning in late spring. He had not planned it. He was walking along the upper path, walking with the lopsided, slightly uncertain gait that was becoming more natural but would never be fully natural, because Tigger's body was a bouncing body and would always be a bouncing body, and walking was a translation, not a native language. Through the trees below, the lower path was visible, the soft ground, the leaning banks, the hawthorn bushes dark and full, and Piglet was there, walking his morning walk, small and careful, his scarf tight, his eyes on the ground. Tigger came down. He walked down the slope to the lower path, not bounced, walked, each step deliberate, each footfall placed with a care that was not Tigger's natural mode, but was his new mode. His approach was quiet as Tigger could be, which was not very quiet. His body was large, and the leaves were dry, and the slope was steep. But the trying was there, and the trying was visible, and the visibility was not a performance, but an honesty.
Piglet!
Piglet turned. His scarf was tight. His eyes were steady.
Hello, Tigger.
They stood on the path. The stream ran beside them. The hawthorns were thick with late spring leaves, green and full. The nest was hidden behind the foliage, invisible from the path now.
Piglet!
Said Tigger.
Did the birds ever come back?
The question sat between them. It was not an apology. It was not a request for forgiveness or an appeal for comfort. Piglet looked at him for a long time. He looked at Tigger the way he looked at the path, with the careful, thorough attention of someone who reads the world from below and misses nothing.
No,
Said Piglet.
they didn't come back.
Tigger's tail moved once. A single twitch, the body processing what the mind already held.
I'm sorry.
Said Tigger. But the word was wrong as soon as it arrived. He heard the wrongness.
No, that's not. I didn't know, Piglet. I didn't know what I was.
His tail twitched again. His paws shifted on the hard ground, the ground his joy had compacted.
The not knowing. That was.
He stopped. His body carried the rest. The paws on the ground they had changed, the tail still, the stripes holding their pattern the way they always did, but holding it now on a body that had learned what holding costs.
I know,
Said Piglet. 2 words. Quiet. The same 2 words Eeyore had said to Piglet a year ago, standing in the mud by the stream. The same weight, the same sufficiency. They stood on the path. The morning was warm. The insects clicked in the recovering leaf litter. Somewhere upstream a bird sang, not from the hawthorns, not a wren, but a bird singing on the lower path in the early days of the path's return. Tigger looked at the hawthorns.
I won't come back,
Said Tigger.
to the path. It needs quiet. It needs what you give it, not what I give it.
Piglet looked at him. His hands were on his scarf, and the grip was loose, and his eyes were steady.
thank you, Tigger.
Tigger nodded. A single nod, quick, the body's minimal gesture, strange and small on a body that usually expressed everything at maximum. He turned and walked up the slope, through the trees, to the upper path. At the top, on the upper path, he stopped. The look around. Branch above, clear. Ground ahead, an oak root, dry, firm. Air, a thrush, distant, heading the other direction. He bounced. Full force. The ground met his paws, and his legs drove down, and the earth returned him to the air, and the air was warm, and the light was gold, and Tigger was Tigger, in the air, full joy, full speed, the whole body doing the thing the whole body was for. Late spring settled over the 100-acre wood with the long, unhurried patience of a season that knows it will become summer, but is not yet ready to announce itself as anything other than what it is. The light lay long across the meadow in the evenings, gold and warm. The trees were fully leafed, the canopy thick and continuous, and beneath the canopy the air was still and smelled of growing things, the green, slightly sweet smell that is not any single plant, but all of them. The stream had settled to its summer level, clear, bright, running over the smooth stones with the sound that streams make when they have stopped hurrying and are simply doing what streams do. The lower path recovered. The beetles crossed the path in the early mornings. The woodlice worked the leaf litter. The ants rebuilt their trails. The celandines bloomed at the margins, yellow, small, opening in the sun. And the bees found them, and the finding was the old finding, the one that had happened every spring before this one, and was happening again. The ground at the center of the path, the hardest ground, the most compacted, the ground beneath the hawthorns where the bouncing had been densest, was still hard. It would be hard for a long time. The compression of daily impact requires seasons to undo, the patient work of frost expanding in the soil's pores, of rain softening the surface, of roots finding cracks and widening them. The ground would recover. But the recovery was measured in seasons, not in weeks, and the path would carry the marks of this spring into the next one and beyond. The wrens did not come back. The nest stayed empty. The moss on it was brown. The structure held. The wrens had built well, built with the precision of birds that know their craft, but the purpose the structure was built for had moved on, and the structure without the purpose was an object, not a home, and the object dried in the warming air and held its shape and waited for nothing. Piglet walked through both every morning, and the walking was the tending, and the tending held both truths at once, because that is what tending does. It does not choose between the thing that is healing and the thing that is lost. It walks the path and notices both. Tigger bounced through the clearing by the stream, the good ground, the firm ground, the ground where he had first bounced as a young Tigger, before the paths and the friends and the seasons of bouncing through the wood had taught his body every surface the wood contained. The ground here was old and hard and open, and it held him with resilience, with return, with the impersonal generosity of earth that has been compacted by time rather than by damage. He bounced. His stripes blurred in the late spring light. The air parted around him, warm, pollen thick, carrying the smell of the stream and the meadow and the distance. Each landing was a report, firm, dry, holding. The ground received his weight and gave it back, and the giving was the old giving, but the legs that gathered for each launch gathered with something they had not had in the clearing a month ago, a deliberateness, a measuring, the muscles reading the ground not only for what it offered, but for what the landing had cost it. Each launch was a commitment. The earth answered. The air received him. At the top of each arc, Tigger was perfectly still, perfectly weightless, held between the ground he had left and the ground he was going to. The look-around. Blackbird on the far oak, beetle crossing the clearing. Clear, then the bounce, full force, full joy. He passed the lower path on his way home, not on it, along the upper path, above it, where the ground was firm and the trees stood apart and the evening light came through in long, warm bars. Below him, through the tree trunks, the lower path was a suggestion. The soft ground visible as a change in the colour of the earth, the leaning banks, the hawthorn bushes dark and full in the late light. Tigger was walking. The bouncing was done for the day. His body was warm and pleasantly tired, the satisfaction of a body that has done the thing it was made for and done it well. He walked along the upper path, and the lower path ran parallel below him, and he could have gone down to it, but he did not. He was passing the stretch, the soft stretch, Piglet's stretch, the stretch where the hawthorns grew and the nest sat empty, and the ground was slowly, season by season, remembering how to be soft, when he stopped. The sound was small, so small that only a body that was not moving could hear it. Tigger's body was almost never not moving. Even his walking had a bounce to it, a rhythm that set the leaves rustling and the ground reporting. But he had stopped, and the stopping was a thing that happened sometimes now, not often, but sometimes, a pause that arrived without being called, and the pause was a silence, and the silence was new, and inside the silence there was room for sounds that had never before reached him. The sound was the path, the lower path doing what it did when nothing large was passing through it. The small machinery of spring at ground level, running. The click of an insect in the leaf litter, small and precise. The rustle of something moving through the undergrowth, a beetle maybe, or a mouse, or one of the small, unnamed creatures that live in the spaces between the named ones. The sound of water in the earth, not the stream, which was audible and obvious, but the groundwater, the slow seepage through the soil that fed the roots and kept the moss alive and made the path what it was. And a bird. Somewhere in the hawthorns, deeper in, away from the path's edge, a robin, its song thin and clear in the evening air. Not a wren. The wrens had not come back, but a robin had found the hawthorns, and the robin was singing, and the singing was the sound of a bird that had decided this place was safe enough to sing in. Tigger stood on the upper path and listened. The sounds rose from below, faint, layered, continuous. the small ground-level text that Piglet read and tended and loved and had tried to share. He listened for a long moment. The sounds continued. The insects clicked, the water moved, the robins sang. They did not know he was there. They were not performing for him. They were the path being the path in the evening, in the late spring, and the being was its own purpose, and the purpose required no audience, and the not requiring was the beauty of it. The sounds were small. They carried. Tigger listened. Then he walked on, because the path was not his, and the sounds were not his, and the not being his was the shape of the knowing. The upper path took him home. The evening came on slowly, the light pulling back from the meadow, the shadows reaching from the trees, the air cooling in the patient way of a season that is taking its time. Below, on the lower path, the insects worked and the water moved, and the flowers held what light remained. The path did what it did. The evening did what it did. Tigger walked through both, and the walking was quiet. Behind him, on the lower path, a robin sang in the hawthorns, and nothing bounced through the place where it sang.